All right, good morning. We're going to be reading from John chapter 2, Jesus' protests in the temple. The Passover is near and Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, Jesus drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. Jesus told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making the house of my father and mother into a marketplace." The disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The religious authorities then said to Jesus, "What sign can you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The authorities then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years. And will you raise it up in 3 days?" But Jesus was speaking of the temple of his body. After Jesus was raised from the dead, the disciples remembered that Jesus had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. I want to share with you when I was a teenager. And of course, I don't know how it was for you guys, but when you get your license, you hope to drive your parents' car. And my dad was amenable to that. My dad, he was somebody who really took good care of things. He took care of physical things very well. So you can imagine he's got 3 teenage boys, and each one at some point is going to want to drive his car, and he keeps it in great shape. But he was willing to let us drive it, but he said, first you have to read the manual. And if you've seen car manuals, they're thick and not riveting. And of course, we just wanted to drive and just get in there and just get started with it, but he made us read the manual. Same thing if he bought a VCR. Back then, VCRs were a big thing, It's like, oh, we get to watch movies whenever we want on these big clunky cassettes. But we had to read the manual first. So my dad, actually, in one way, he was very much like a disciple, because he said, there is a way to use these things, and I want you to know what the way is. In the car that I drive right now, when I start the car and it's cold, there's a blue light that's on the dashboard. It has a little temperature icon. And sometimes in the winter it takes 7-8 minutes for the car before the blue light goes off. I remember one time sitting with my friend, and he was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm just waiting for the car to go," because you're just wasting gas. I'm like, somebody made this car and put this light in it. And I'm going to say that they have some knowledge that I don't have. So I'm going to sit here for the 8 minutes. Of course, eventually I got a remote starter, so I didn't have to sit in the car. But I believe that things are created, and there is a way that they work really well. But if you don't learn the way, then you shouldn't be surprised if the vehicle that you are given or the thing that you are trying to do does not work that well. At the end of the passage, or towards the end, we learn that Jesus is speaking about the temple of his body. And I want to talk to you today about the temple of your body, and that there is a way. That our goal is to be in communion with God, and we know from Jesus' teachings that the presence of the Christ, the presence of God is within. It's within each soul. And how are we able to be in connection with that? Well, there's a way. And Jesus spoke about it. He says, "I am the way. Follow me." In other words, I am going to live out what it looks like. And if you follow me, then you too will be on the way. And when you live the way, then you eventually will be in communion with that presence within. So that's exciting, except, as it turns out, depending on your perspective, there seems to be a lot of restrictions and a lot of rules. But if you read the car manual, you realize that, yeah, there are certain things that you should do and there are certain things that you shouldn't do. And if you've ever been in somebody's car that's kind of, one of those cars that, well, we don't know if it's going to make it, and it makes all sorts of strange noises, and it just looks like it hasn't been treated very well. Why is that? Why is it looking all broken down and disheveled? Why is it that, the brakes are squeaking or grinding, or you don't know if it's going to start. Well, it's possible that we haven't treated it the way the manufacturer recommended. Now, there is a manufacturer of the human being, known as God, the Creator. And we consider the Gospels of Jesus Christ to be the manual for how to live. Now, the beautiful thing about that manual is that it doesn't, say, get up at 7 a.m. and then have this kind of breakfast and then go to work and then meditate. It doesn't lay it out like that. Because there has to be a lot of room for every individual's vehicle to be honed in a way that works for you. I want your vehicle to work really well for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about just the physical body, because the physical body is the temple in which resides the presence of God. And if the physical body is not loved, if there is not zeal for the physical body, because it is the temple for the Christ, then we shouldn't be surprised if it's very difficult to access that Christ. Now, many of you, this is, he goes off on this kind of intense experience pretty early on in the Gospel. This is John chapter 2. So the Christ enters into the temple, and he goes, that's wrong, and get that out of here. Now, you have turned my house into a marketplace. Sometimes people are turned off by the Christian way because we go, well, it's too harsh, it's too severe. But how great it is that somebody shows up and goes, why are you ruining this temple? I mean, that's because somebody cares deeply about it. Now, if they're angry and vindictive, that's different. When you step onto the path and you get serious about it and you start meditating and you start doing exercises with light, then the Christ in you begins to highlight those ways in which you are basically exploiting the physical temple. That's what the money changers are doing. That's what the sellers of doves and cattle and sheep are doing. They're going, we're in the temple, so therefore we're part of the temple energy, so when people come in, well, we can rip them off now because they're not going to question us. So all these people that he drives out are exploiting the innocence of those who come to the temple as a religious place, as a spiritual place. So if you think about how this plays out inwardly, because we teach that as above, so below. So this is the below, meaning the earthly expression of it. So how does this happen inwardly as the higher spiritual? Well, many of you, we were even talking about this last night. When it comes to alcohol, alcohol is something that rips off your system. It gives you a temporary sense of, sensual elation, followed by a robbing of energy and consciousness. And there's a murkiness and there's a tiredness. And they call alcohol a depressant. So everybody knows it's a depressant. So the Christ in you is going get this out of here. This doesn't work. This is not part of the way. There is no place in the manual that says we're supposed to get loaded. So there are many things that the Christ in you begins to point out, whether you hear it as directly as that or you just feel it, because the next day or as you're doing it, you can feel your conscience going, I don't know. I would say those physical things are relatively basic, where you take away these substances that stimulate you, because the Christ in you is going you have turned this place into some sort of a farce. You don't need this stuff. If you want elation and you want social grace and you want energy, work with me, follow me, be in communion with me. When our culture, we go it's so hard to do it that way. It's so much easier to just get these 32-ounce lattes or whatever. I mean, it's a lot of caffeine to the system, And it's sold as though it's energy. It's not energy. It's a type of a drug that has an effect on your temple that stimulates your heart and your adrenal system. So there's nothing godly about that. No, I'm fine with things in moderation. I tend to be severe with myself because I want the full experience. So I don't want to rely on these things that I know have a price. So it's up to you if zeal will consume you. The zeal for my Father's house, will it consume me such that I'm not going to give in to those things? And with any of those things, there's a period, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, where it's painful. Because your being is used to doing certain things. And then you have to teach yourself that we don't do that anymore. And then you'll find that it's the new way. It's established. It's not that difficult. But what's interesting is the consciousness can drag a little. It's like, I remember I used to have those great lattes on Saturday mornings. And then you go and have one and you're like, whoa, what the hell just happened? It's like you kind of outgrow it. But part of you still wants to be able to go back there. So I know what that's like. So there's adjustments on that level. Let's talk about emotional stuff. Do I let anger consume me? Do I let anxiety consume me? When you experience those emotions, it's like a chemical is running through your bloodstream. Now, there's nothing wrong with anger and anxiety because they are God-given emotions. However, if you allow these beings of anger, and when I say beings, imagine them as like those who are selling the cattle and the money changers, and they get to stay there and cultivate. So they're constantly cultivating this idea that let's be angry and let's be motivated by anger. And what is it? When you're angry, what it feels like. You feel heat in your body, you feel tension, because the chemical creates a pressure. And the pressure is trying to get you to do something to resolve the pressure. Unfortunately, in our culture, what we often do is go like, I want to create this anger on the other person's side. I want to create this suffering for the other person. I want them to know how it feels. But that is not in the manual. That is not the way. The way is of forgiveness. And there's a passage when Jesus says, if you have a conflict with your brother, drop your items at the altar and go and resolve the conflict. And if you can't, then get somebody else that you consider a good mediator. And if you can't, then bring the whole congregation. And if you still can't, then let it go. And sort of, just do what you need to do to move on. That's in the Bible. That's in the gospel. There is no place that says if somebody wrongs you, you are to go back and, dig your heels in and then just stand there until they get it. And if you can, inflict a little twisting of the knife, that's even better. That is not the way. And why is that? Because you're going to feel crappy. Now, the consciousness drags, right? So it's like, well, I bet you that's probably good, but oh man, I'd really like to see that person suffer. That's the old consciousness that you are trying to outgrow. There's nothing to be gained from watching somebody suffer, even if they torture you with whatever it is that they might do that causes challenge and difficulty for you. I think, the final piece I want to discuss here is that at some point the religious authorities who have allowed these temple salespeople to hang out. And why would they let the salespeople hang out? I don't know exactly, but I imagine maybe they're paying a commission. They're going, well, we get to set up our tables here. We have to pay a fee. So the religious authorities might be going, well, we can't just throw these people out. We rely on these people for income. This is part of what supports the temple. You can't just come in here and whip them out. Well, that is what I often hear when I say, well, you need to change and you need to do this and you need to stop putting this in your body. And if you get anxiety, then you need to go to meditate quickly, meaning that day. And you need to bring zeal for God to that, because that will bring you to a place where you'll stay with it until you go, okay, I have to go through the process and validate my emotions and understand what I think happened and ask God to show me the truth and then create an action plan and then go out in the world and execute it. And people are like, oh, man, all that? I'm like, yeah, all that. And if you did that 10 times in a row, because it's 10 times in a given month you got anxious, the next month starts and you're like, that's just what I do. And I find that I'm much happier and more calm. But you see, the religious authorities, they're dragging. They're going like, we still need these things in here. How can you can't just throw them out. You've heard the expression, God is no respecter of persons, right? Think of this as an internal experience. So the priest says, well, you should stop doing that. And the religious authority in you, which is probably your mind, goes, well, I can't, you might say it outwardly to me, or you say it inwardly to yourself, well, I'm not really that, I'm not that committed to this, I'm not going to give up all these things. So the religious authorities find a way to justify these things. But when you hear the expression, God is no respecter of persons, God does not sit there and go like, well, I don't want to emotionally, upset you. God wants to caringly move you along. So there's deep love in that. But when you are nervous about upsetting somebody emotionally, that is, you disconnect from love. Now, I want to be tactful. I want to be well-timed. I want to be kind. But in this passage, Jesus comes in and he makes a whip of cords. So what is that teaching? There are certain things that have to be driven out. So there are certain things that we're not going to usher out and just sit there and wait until they, whenever you're ready, we'll just sit here. No, it's like, you get the hell out of here now. You're making this place weird. And what's the benefit of doing that? The benefit is you don't have that disruption anymore. What's the price? Well, you don't relate to everybody the same. If everybody's sitting around sipping a Zinfandel and you're like having a soda water, all of a sudden maybe you look weird. I don't know. Or everybody's going out for Sunday morning coffee and you're like, I'll hang out, but I'm not going to have a coffee. What happened? Well, just, I don't know. Just kind of doing something else now. Matt actually, who's not here today, he had to give up alcohol. And for a while he was just really afraid of how he'd be perceived. What are people going to say when I'm at these social work functions and everyone's having drinks? And he realized, if he ordered one drink and just sort of sat there the whole night and didn't really sip it, nobody cared, actually. But slowly but surely, everybody's kind of going into this, and he's very clear, and he can go home and contact his wife or communicate with his wife before he goes to bed, and he can wake up and meditate and exercise and feels good. So there's the delayed gratification of those things. We want the instant gratification of striking out at somebody and letting our anger have its full wrath. Yeah, well, maybe that feels good for a couple seconds. But as I've shared with many of you, typically that doesn't make the person go oh, wow, we really hurt them, we should probably give in to their demands. No, it makes people go oh, okay, well, check this out. And then you get this back and forth. That's why the world is at war in a lot of ways. I don't like what you did here. Oh yeah? Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we're going to bomb you. You're going to bomb us, well, we're going to bomb you. Well, we're going to stop sending food to your country. Oh yeah? Well, we're going to... in a short order, you've got a world that's totally uncooperative. And this battle is existing within each soul. So all the social programs in the world are not going to fix it until each individual goes and ejects the religious authorities and studies the manual and implements. And you're going to have resistance. The way is, as they say, it's the road less traveled. So as you continue along the way, you find there's less and less, rest stops where people are hanging out and want to connect with you. Okay, well, that's the price we pay for, reading the manual. How many people did you know that have read the manual for their car, right? Not that many. So when it comes to this manual and who's following it, it's the same thing. There's just not that many. But I want you to be filled with zeal for the full experience of what it means to live as a human was created. Just look at the physical body. We barely understand how it works. It's the most amazing, to me it's like this incredible creation. Just with the breathing and the eating and the muscular structure and just, it's amazing. As people know, I hurt my thumb the other day, so it kind of swells up as a way to indicate there's a problem, and so I can give it a little bit of space. My immune system is going we got to attend to this. And I think that's cool. The immune system goes alert, something going on here, and sends all this juice, and, if you know how to work with light and you don't get all paranoid, the rest of my life I'm going to have a broken thumb or something. No. Your body will repair it, because that's part of the way. It's programmed to do that. Imagine if you had to sit there for 8 hours and just focus on it and direct energy to it. What a waste of time. But whoever created us created all these systems where we don't have to waste a lot of time doing that. Okay, so some people go yeah, but I struggle with all these physical things. Yeah, I know. I've been on a slow journey to try to figure out each one of them, one by one. And so here I'm 52 years old, and most of the stuff's functioning pretty well. I spent 4 years running a moving company, so I think that cost me some, vertebra. Because my lower back is probably the one area that I consider a little bit weak. But you guys know I can get obsessive about certain aspects of the body because I just find it so engaging to work with the body and learn what if you do this, this is the response to it. It's the same thing with the spiritual path. If I wean myself off of this, what are the rewards that are coming? That's the zeal that has to consume you. And when it does, you'll get to experience the fullness of a life in Christ.